Welcome, everyone. Despite my background, I'm doing this in an individual capacity because we're talking about Global Income Coin. And I'm here with Jeff, the CEO of Global Income Coin, and Andy, who has taken an interest in the project. And I think that Andy I suspect he will have great questions, and probably the questions that he has are on the minds of other people. So anyway, I'd say, explain to us why Global Income Coin is going to fail. What should we think about? What should we address? And looking forward to spending this time together. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks for that, Sid. And for anyone tuning in, I should clarify, I don't have any specific background in this space. I'm just a curious person who's read some papers here. And so I'll be just asking questions. Hopefully that means the questions are closer to things that you might have on your mind. Okay, so I think it's very interesting to compare, before we get to anything about, say, strategies for seigniorage, strategies for distribution, even like technical issues around ERC20 or anything like that, it's interesting just to compare possible avenues for contending with issues of global poverty. And so I'm curious how you think about this project in the context of, say, all of the other possible interventions which are relevant for interventions in global poverty. I have a few in mind, but I'm curious, like, what is your top competitor? If you weren't going to do Global Income Coin, what would you put those marginal dollars towards?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the other thing is allowing people kind of to move to areas of greater productivity. There's an estimate that could double the world's GDP. About 15% of the world population would move. I think that's super interesting. So I'm a donor to the Charter Cities Institute. I started a company called Double GDP, who's going straight after that. I think the nice thing about that is, like, you create value out of nothing. In this case, it's a bit of redistribution from the countries that used to have a lot of seigniorage to the people. I think creating something is even more interesting. So, but I think Global Income Coin is very interesting because although it's redistributing the thing, it's redistributing to the right people. I think we've also seen an evolution where there's a lot of kind of well-intentioned projects to reduce poverty. And I've seen in the recent years, people have warmed up to give direct cash transfers as a great avenue to do it.
Great. It's good that you bring that up, because I think really in this category, the two questions that are top of mind for me are, how does this proposal compare to other approaches for direct cash transfer, which have some degree of efficacy that we can discuss? And then also, how do proposals for direct cash transfer compare to other marginal uses for dollars? And there are a number of marginal uses which appear to yield much higher margins. And so I'd love to kind of just discuss the two of those in turn. I think it's interesting to compare this project to something like Give Directly. So you have kind of like a decentralized versus a centralized apparatus. And you have also just a complete uniform distribution of resources in contrast to, say, a concentrated distribution of resources. And I can see why, in terms of monetary policy, it would be difficult to make the weekly grants that are proposed as part of the basic income coin, say be concentrated to a greater degree in certain regions relative to others. But if we step back from like mechanisms and we just compare, say, like the efficacy on the dollar of something like Give Directly, they're able to distribute 83% of all of their revenues directly to people. And they're distributing those revenues to people who are concentrated in the regions that need this most. So I'm curious, like, if we think about this like an internal combustion engine or something for using the proposed $890 billion of international aid, what kind of efficiency rate do you think we can get from this ICE?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll let Jeff also address it after me. I love Give Directly. I think it's amazing. It's a big inspiration. I especially like the results that they've been getting from their projects in Kenya. I think that if you're gonna if you have only $1, you should probably put it in gift directly, and it goes to kind of regions that need it more, which I think that's amazing. I do think there's a place for kind of global basic income. The idea is that if you're going to do this at scale, you might get adverse effects if you try to target certain regions and then people move, and then like it gets complicated pretty fast. And the whole idea about universal basic income is that it's unconditional, everyone gets it, and that takes away a lot of the paperwork and the administration. The other thing is that where does the dollar come from? So maybe if you had $1 to spend, yeah, just send it to Give directly. Like if we were only distributing, if global income coin was only a mechanism to distribute it, it's not that interesting. I think with Seigniorage, we got a business model, right? The money is there. There's a source of money, and there can be additional sources of money on top of that. I hope that those will come through, but I think that is the interesting part, that we kind of combine the giving it effectively with like that creating money out of Seigniorage. Jeff?
Yeah, just kind of adding to that, going back to the last question too, a lot of this goes around like sustainability, competing ideas and different initiatives and even government programs. A lot of times it's like, okay, they have aid programs, certain types of policies that think they're going to work. They might work in the short term, but long term, or something that's more sustainable through conflict or changing economies in different developing countries, that's a big issue. A lot of the money that's spent doesn't go very far in terms of time. They might build a road, but it's not maintained, and then all the economic growth from that road doesn't kind of reveal itself. So I think with global income coin, if we can build this ecosystem and network around this cryptocurrency, this global currency, you have a sustainable model, plus you have the scale of all that revenue, like Sid said, the seigniorage mechanism. So that's kind of, in a very simplified sense, why this is different, and maybe why it has that more global scale aspect to it.
That's great. I really love to dig into each of those things in turn. So first, I want to talk some more about the seigniorage. And second, I want to talk about some competing projects, because while Rhodes may have some of the troubles you've described, there are a number of projects that appear to yield something like 10 to 25x cash on cash return in terms of their efficacy, and that's durable over time. But before we get to those, I want to talk about the seigniorage. So I think there must be something that maybe I'm not understanding about this as a revenue generation model, and maybe you can explain it to me. So in the most wildly optimistic possible estimates, in which the entire planet's monetary supply and our $900 billion of annual international aid move into this fund, and we're taking 5% off the entire monetary supply, we generate somewhat less than $1 per person per day. Now, we might imagine that an extremely, extremely successful outcome for this project, just like wildly successful, is that 1% of the world's monetary supply moves into this project. At which point, if you're taking 5% seigniorage on this, you're generating really just a tiny amount of money for people. And so what am I missing here? How is seigniorage actually very powerful here?
I think we're unlikely to end up at 1%. So either we'll be successful and
it's either 0 or 100
50% plus, or most likely we will not be successful. But this is not going to be a 1% thing. Like, yeah, I think that's unlikely. It will work. Or
let me make an argument for 1%, actually, because I think 1% may actually be somewhat compelling. So I think a case for 1% is something like this supplants certain kinds of convenience currencies, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, where currently products like M-Pesa might be used. And so if you were to supplant M-Pesa and not do things elsewhere, you could get an outcome like that.
I don't see why someone in the West would not be interested in $1 a day. I see people doing all kinds of crazy stuff to keep access to a Netflix account of somebody else, and that's like $12 a month for HD. So like, I assume they would sign up.
So your answer to my question is that like, okay, so the 5% is enough, is significant in the case that we get the entire monetary supply on this thing, or like most of it.
So which 5% are we talking about?
So in the paper, you say that the
5%
currency can tolerate a 5%.
That would be significant, right? Like if you become the currency of choice in the world. People have to kind of need a supply of that currency, and that's kind of, they will buy it from you basically, and that's a source of income.
I see. So do you think seigniorage is likely to be, I guess, a useful strategy for funding this in the case that this does not become the dominant currency of the world?
No, if it's not popular, there's very little income from seigniorage.
Right, but I want to double down on that, because there's a difference between not popular and not the dominant currency of the world. I mean, even the US dollar is only 60% of reserves right now. I guess the point I'm trying to make is something like, it seems like this could be popular and still ineffective, kind of simultaneously, in terms of seigniorage.
I think if you'd asked me 20 years ago whether we'd be using, like 50% plus of Americans will be using a smartphone of a single brand and basically a single model range, I'd say, of course not. We're going to have great diversity. Like, that would be as crazy as everyone driving the same car. What are we seeing? Everyone's using the same smartphone. Everyone's going to own a Tesla car in the future. Like, I don't see really a good reason to use different currencies. Like, it's kind of annoying. So I think when you get to 5% or when you get to like 10% adoption, it's a reinforcing movement.
Yeah, I guess my concern here is something like, a few minutes ago you were saying that the underpinning financial driver of this thing, like the source of the value, is not meant to be those $8, that 890 billion we were talking about, but rather it's the seigniorage. And I guess what I'm seeing here is like, that is only the case in the outcome where this thing becomes the dominant monetary product. And so even setting aside like my estimates of the likelihood that might happen, it seems like there is some important path dependence here. I guess like how much money has to be spent in terms of the kind of INF like dollars in order to get to a place where this can be competitive in that way.
I think I'm not understanding the question totally, so Jeff can comment on that. I think if you introduce something new, it's always like a chicken egg problem. Like, how do you get people to use it? And when there's not and I think that the nice thing is that if few people are using it, we also don't need to distribute a lot. So we can keep kind of the distribution on that like $1 a day or something like that, even at the beginning. I've seen a lot of other models where it's kind of tricky, like you fix it by doing kind of an airdrop of the currency in the beginning, where people get a giant amount of coins that are worth very little individually. And then you hope they increase in value and you get all kinds of distortions. I think this one is cleaner because we can just start small. And the only problem would be if they only kind of cash out the whole time and don't start using it for anything else, which we can talk about. But I think if you only have 100 users, then it kind of works. So it works both when small and when big.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, like there's a time frame to think about too. Like, seigniorage can work at like low supply, like low circulating supply, if there's an ecosystem of demand that's supporting its price above our target rate in that sense. And then hopefully there's a balance over time in terms of adoption and distribution. And there's gonna be volatility, but that's kind of, you go back to like, Bitcoin has a speculative aspect of it because it has a limited supply.
Yeah.
If it had this mechanism where instead of going to $50,000 for one Bitcoin, if supply was created and kind of mitigated it at like 10,000, there's value being distributed if that demand for the coin is maintained. Bitcoin is mostly speculative, but if you can create a system that's actually used by people and more in the payment systems, or if there's maybe some type of staking and I don't know, any type of demand creating mechanism, that's going to help drive its value, which helps generate profit for it. So
I agree. Yeah. I mean, that does seem true. I'm more just asking about how much and like exactly what these parameters look like. Let me try to ask this question again, because I think maybe I just didn't phrase it very clearly. I'm wondering about path dependence. If we think about like what the integral looks like of exactly how much money likely needs to be in this fund that we're paying out at 1% a day, and that we're using a maximum of 1% of to prop up the currency when it's below $1. Do you have estimates or simulations on exactly how many dollars likely need to pass through this fund? before certain outcomes occur?
We don't have simulations. I want to think through that. I think there's some evidence out there. Smaller projects, I've seen, like, this is more crypto-backed stable coins. They've been supported in the 60 to 70% range in terms of there would be backing of that, and then whatever ecosystem around there, whatever is using that coin supports the rest of the value, or the governance token supports the rest of it. So
no, I'm not quite following. Can you say just a little more about that?
Yeah, I guess I'm not explaining it very well. It's more, some stable coins have a fractional backing in terms of, say, the like USDC supports 70% of the value, and then 30% is supported by the governance token of the protocol. That's kind of, thinking through like how much money needs to support the token to maintain its value. That's a starting place on a very small scale project.
Yeah, that's different from maintaining the value. I guess there's maintaining the value at $1 and dispersing $1 a day, and those both require income sources.
Yeah, so it's oh, sorry, Sid.
I think specifically, like what percentage of time will we do like the interventions that are maximized for a percent of reserves per day? I think because you'll have people kind of trading, like going long, going short, I think most of the time they're going to keep it. And then when there's kind of a disruption in the force, when someone's either trying to move it out of bounds, then we'd be trading as global income coin holdings, or whatever we call it. So I think that will be a minority of the days. And then on those days, it would be probably, it will take a while to bring it back into order. So probably you're talking about a multi-day thing where you're trying to get the area under the curve back to one, or back to zero.
And I think I followed this area under the curve argument. This makes sense. I mean, the reason why I'm pulling on this thread is I guess like the discussion that I'm not seeing in the paper, and that I'm pretty curious about, is like exactly what kind of outlay do we think is necessary to establish this thing as the dominant currency, with the kind of like equilibrium behavior that is desired. Because like my absolutely no doing math here instinct is that we're talking about maybe not a totally insane amount of money, but probably high single-digit trillions of dollars funneling through this thing over the course of some years, tens of years. Does that sound about right?
I think we can start it with $100, and then it should kind of feed on itself.
No, I want to push on that. I mean, the reason why I don't find that very plausible is this behavior where it almost certainly either succeeds in a very large way or fails. And it seems to me that it is necessary to put a great deal of energy into the system to have any chance of having the former outcome as opposed to failure. And so starting with $100 seems like 5 nines of certainty you're just going to end up in failure. If you tell me you're starting with $100 million, maybe we can take a couple of those nines away. So the question is like, how much do you need to take, say, a lot of the nines away and give yourselves a 10% chance of succeeding?
I think that in order to change something, you need a great deal of energy. And I think the energy will come from the controversy that this project will attract.
Okay.
And
so tell me about how. So I can see how that can possibly lead to demand. Like some people might on principle say, I'm going to accept this because of this controversy, and like I believe in the ideology behind the coin. And some people will say like, I want to acquire some of this because I believe in the system. Some people might donate to the fund for the same reason.
I think the energy in the beginning will be mostly like people signing up to get the free the distribution every week, and then people saying this is unsustainable, which I disagree with. Right. I think it's sustainable. We lay out why that is, but I think those two fronts will clash, and you're going to have people who are supporting it because they get free money, and people who say it's not sustainable. And I think that will generate a tremendous amount of energy.
Not to be, I guess, pushy about it. I think it could potentially be sustainable. But the thing I'd like to push on what you just said was, and we lay out why that is. I don't think you do. I mean, you kind of like sketch at a very high level how conceivably, with certain parameters and certain behaviors in the world,
it might
the system
work.
could conceivably be
that's the case
sustainable.
we're making.
But what
We're not proving that it will work.
The questions I'm asking are all trying to access basically, what is the range of parameters of the world in which this might work? And is it possible that we fall in that range? And exactly like what kind of investment is necessary?
I totally agree. I'm with you. And I think everyone else, like we're not sure that it will work, but we're also sure that it's not like a pyramid scheme. It's not like we're sure it won't work at scale.
Sure.
It's like
sure.
It might work.
I believe that there's a range of if we were to somehow give the fund in question some tens of trillions of dollars, I believe that this possibly could work. And then there's a separate question of like, is that a good idea? Is that a good marginal use of that money?
I think it needs to kind of, I'm willing to invest in the order of millions on it. I don't have trillions, and I don't think it would be wise to kind of start it off with that.
Okay.
It needs to kind of prove itself. It would be very risky to do anything else. I don't think it needs sustained kind of, it should pay for itself if it's working. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, then too bad. But if it works, it should pay for itself. It doesn't need a lot of cash infusion. Like, it's nice, it helps, but I think what you need for currency is popularity. Popularity tends to come from awareness, and awareness, if there's a lot of opinions where people either hate it or love it, that will help with awareness.
Yeah, I just don't think it's true that if it works, it pays for itself necessarily. I mean, for one thing, you're achieving your target of $1 a day, which you don't even like quite achieve in the most optimistic estimates.
70 cents, but hoping for a little bit of inflation in the US dollar.
Well, we could be a little generous. Even that relies on like consuming the entire international aid budget of the entire world.
I don't think it will. Well, maybe it does rely on that. I thought most of it was coming from seigniorage.
I think yeah. So there's a couple. Like the funding backing, like, so the reserve, where that money comes from, that doesn't actually need to exist. If this token was like, think of it as like, if we're recreating the dollar,
right?
Like the dollar just has this value because our government taxes us in dollars, we pay for our goods in dollars, debt is issued in dollars. If there's a future world where global income coin is where everything is denominated, it's going to have that value because of the network, the strength of the network of use. So like all the money,
yes, I think I can see how that's true.
I think all like the funds that are potentially could be used to support the treasury, that's more saying like to support this token in terms of having actual value in the market, not assuming it's entirely everything is denominated in it. That's kind of the idea. So like there's some research around global universal basic income and thinking about global taxes and how it could generate funds. There are some mechanisms that would generate plenty of funds to provide, at least $1 a day to everybody. But it's that reserve, that treasury is more about just saying like, okay, we have this supporting mechanism behind the growth of this token. If it were to be like 100% successful, we wouldn't need a reserve because everybody's trading in it.
Yes, I agree that that's true. Again, I'm pulling on path dependence here.
Yeah.
Right.
And Andy, I looked it up. You're right. It needs both the seigniorage and the
it's
donation.
About a third. Yeah.
But it's about 2/3 seigniorage. So like, I just thought that $1 a day sounded better than like 60 cents.
Yeah, of course.
So we're taking some shortcuts there.
That's fine. That's fine. I will not begrudge you this. And I should say also all this intention is great. So like my questions here are just about like generating the best possible project. Let me switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about some counterfactuals. Let's talk about alternative marginal uses for the dollar. You mentioned give directly, so I imagine you're familiar with the analysis of give well. Is that
for sure?
Fair? Cool. Okay. So I guess let's talk then about the Against Malaria Foundation, which at current estimates and depending on the country has somewhere between an 8x to 25x return on the dollar in terms of expected yield from aid. So I guess even comparing to direct cash transfer programs, why in what circumstances would we prefer direct cash transfer? Leave the coin alone. Just think about direct cash transfer at all to something like maximally funding against malaria.
I think it's a good question, and it's I think we can be simple about it because it's not our decision to make. So those people are free to kind of, those people in governments are free to put their donations where they want.
Yeah, I don't find this persuasive because this project requires advocating for, say, this tax revenue that you were mentioning or the aid revenue you were mentioning, which could go to bed nets, right?
Yeah. I think we're not the only people who think that this would be an interesting way to do it. We're not claiming those donations just quite yet. Let's first prove the coin. We don't, in the beginning, I think it's like in the third phase or something like that. So let's see how well it is. I think a lot of donations come with adverse side effects. And does that mean it's not an 8x increase? No, that doesn't mean it, like, probably still good to do the malaria nets. I think GiveWell is an amazing thing. In fact, in my will, I'm, apart from what I distribute to family, everything else is going to GiveWell. So I think
high praise.
I think it's, well, yeah, well, you can thank me when I'm dead, but because then it happened, I might change my will before the time. But I think it's quite amazing what you're doing, and I think it's absolutely great. It's a calculation example. I think in the beginning it will be my money, and then some probably high net worth individuals, and we'll see if this is the best way to kind of help with poverty. The paper I just linked is a way of saying that, like, hey, we should get out of our national bubbles and start thinking about poverty on a global scale. And I think this is one of the ways to do it. And some malaria initiatives, like the one that GiveWell reviews, are really good. There's also malaria initiatives where they distribute a lot of nets, and then people start fishing with them, and they get poisoning from the DDT that was the nets were impregnated with. So
I expect this is built into the estimates of dollar efficacy, but it's true that there are externalities.
Yeah. But hey, very open. Probably there's better initiatives for national governments to give to than this. That makes sense. I think there's a certain amount of, like, hey, we're giving it to everyone in an equal way. I don't know. There's some equality aspect to it, but it's not our decision to make, so we shouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, giving people money creates demand, creates a consumer out of somebody. So businesses get built around it. It's back to my sustainability. Like, can we build sustainable economies around people who are currently poor? Because that's what's holding them back. It's some, obviously malaria really helps with development because you're getting rid of sickness and improving health. But there's a lot of places that just don't have any buying power where services and businesses get built around them. So it's still a small amount, but that's the general idea of, like, can we build a sustainable system that's going to grow this world economy in a more fair way?
Sure. Yeah, and just I guess in defense of your program, the Kenya GiveWell study that you mentioned was kind of ballpark the number of dollars per capita that you're aiming to disperse, and it did stimulate quite a lot of marginal consumption, creation of businesses, as well as a whole bunch of other very positive effects. I'm going to push on equality a bit. I think equality is, well, like, obviously equality is a PR liability here, but, like, whatever, let's put that aside for a moment. I was really struck by, I was unaware of and struck by, as I looked into the numbers, just the starkness in the national differences of poverty. It is incredibly stark. And I was even more struck by the World Bank's projections for the 2030 ending poverty target, which it looks like we're not going to hit. But the thing that really surprised me about those projections is that it looks like in as little as a decade, it's basically going to be entirely sub-Saharan Africa. Like 80+% of people below the poverty line will be in sub-Saharan Africa. 10 years ago, it was like actually distributed, South and East Asia as well. And so seeing that, I find it very difficult to square that with proposals for equal giving everywhere, particularly given the margin needed. So not only the prevalence, but the intensity of the poverty. So if you look not only at the percentage of people who are living below that amount, but the amount by which they are living below whatever line you set, even in other countries outside of sub-Saharan Africa, which are experiencing extreme poverty with some prevalence, the intensity of that poverty, that is the distance away from the line, is much smaller. And so my like very naive, smooth brain reaction to this is like, we should really just be putting all of our effort in sub-Saharan Africa here. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that thinking about it a bit more, like we should probably just remove the charitable giving from the calculation. It's nice to get to $1 a day, but maybe we can just say, look, in 30 years, like we should account for inflation, and then we can get to $1 a day in the future and get away from this, this charitable giving.
Sure. Right.
I think even if you wanted to, like, say, distribute equally to everyone in sub-Saharan Africa, probably will include a country or a location or something like that. So it would allow for doing that, but there might be better mechanisms and more worthwhile initiatives like the malaria initiative you talked about earlier. So maybe we should just get away from that, because I think it's a distraction. Because the point is, like, why don't we just focus there? We need the people in the high income countries to use global income coin. Otherwise, the seniors won't be there, and we don't have anything to distribute. So I think that's the reason we do it equally, and we should remove the charitable income source. We can just say, hey, there's different ideas about it. It could be charitable, it could be a worldwide carbon tax, could be this, could be that, but let's shelve that as a. Well,
let me access the crux here, because I think this might be persuasive. So I think the crux for me is exactly how much money needs to be invested into this currency before it's this question I keep asking, and that none of us has the answer to, but before it can have a shot of becoming universal and therefore to generate enough seigniorage to be interesting. Because if that number is low, then what you're saying sounds great. And we don't really need to worry about the charitable giving in our calculation, because we can just assume that we snap to this future wherein it's the dominant currency and we can generate the seigniorage that we need. And I think, like, the nature of the crux is that if that parameter is high, if the amount of money that must be injected into the system in order to prop up its value is very large, then it no longer seems all that persuasive. Does that seem like a fair representation of the difference we're accessing here?
Jeff, you want to take this?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. So if we have an early reserve, it's, basically the early supply is supported. When it grows, it goes back to, like, how much supply is out there, how much demand is for the coin. Getting to a place where, like, are we producing enough scale, enough seigniorage to make an impact in the world with enough distributions? That number, I have no idea. Is it successful when it's in the millions? Is it successful when it's in the billions? Like, obviously, reaching the entire globe is going to be trillions. But it really depends on, does this coin have some demand aspect to it that supports the trajectory of the growth of the coin over time? And it's going to be both ways. Like, we'll have this pretty predictable supply distribution that increase, and then we'll have to figure out a way to create the demand. So yeah, I don't have a good answer in terms of, how much money needs to be in that reserve to get it to
I know
whatever our goal is.
I'm really just trying to evaluate the crux, because like what I'm pointing out here, and I think, like, maybe the difference here, let me try to identify the difference here. I think the concerns I'm highlighting have to do with concern for counterfactuals, because I think I'm imagining that the necessary parameter, the necessary amount of money needed to prop up this thing as a useful currency is so large that it would be competing rivalrously with other programs which could do more good. And I think what you're saying is, like, actually that might not be the case. If you can, like, create a lot of demand then you might not need to inject that much money into the treasury in order for this thing to work. In which case, like, hey, in the scheme of things, some governments want to do some bed nets here. We're going to do this thing there. It's all good. Does that describe the difference pretty well?
Yeah, I think that like the money is not coming from as an alternative use from the bed nets. Like we're going to remove that part. It's generated by seigniorage, so it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think that doesn't quite work. Like, yes, it's generated by seigniorage, but like only after this thing becomes an incredibly dominant currency, and the path to achieving that requires some amount of propping up the currency. So the question is how much.
I disagree. Like,
okay, great.
So I think there will be a lot. I think over time you're going to see in the beginning that people are just curious, and although it's not going to go above $1 long term, there's going to be pretty wild swings in it. And I think some people will want to own a little bit of it. And then at some point, you're going to start seeing transactions with it. It's interesting though, like the seigniorage is not just a function of how many people are on it, but also of how many transactions each individual is doing with it. So we should fully model that out. I think in the beginning, you might not be doing a lot of transactions with it, so not generating a ton of seigniorage, but it will be kind of interesting, and people might buy some just because it's interesting. Even though we have a long-term like goal of like keeping it stable, it's not going to be stable. So I can totally see it work in the beginning. I can see it work at the end. I think we have some more modeling to do, whether it works in the middle.
Right.
Yeah, and
let me check my understanding of the model here, because again, like I'm not a macro person. Say that you have 1 million people sign up for this, and your desire is to issue them something that is equal in value to something like $1 a day, because the issuance is equal to 1% of the fund per day, as I understand.
Per week, yes. So there's the percent a day for trading, and there's a percent per week for the distribution.
Got it. Okay, so to issue $7 a week, then to 1 million people, the fund, and then to subsequently prop up those coins back to $1 to compensate the inflation that you've caused.
There's two separate mechanisms, and suppose we like spend a lot of money on propping up the coin, then the reserves will go down and the weekly distribution will be less. So we're not saying you're going to get $1 per day. It's like that's kind of an aim.
I know. I'm trying to access an equilibrium point. Like maybe it's just difficult to do that.
Well,
I guess I'm imagining.
So let's go to like trading the token speculative wise. Say you have $100 million of circulating supply. We don't know, is like if we have $10 million in the treasury and basically there's sell orders for 10 million, that's where the liquidity ends, right?
Right.
So there has to be like the entire supply of dollars isn't traded in terms of what the market price is in the Forex markets. It's whatever that percentage of liquidity is.
Yes. So
early on, the percentage of reserves backing that circulating supply is going to keep the coin stable in terms of, 1% a week with the small supply is going to have enough backing. As this thing grows into a larger network, that percentage of what actually people, speculate on in the markets for relative value against currencies, we don't know what that percentage is. Like how
yeah,
like if it's a global economy using GIC, the percentage is going to be much smaller because the Forex market's going to be, not the entire economy, not the entire world economy. So,
okay, yeah, I was ignoring the currency markets.
Yeah,
and that's a really important thing I missed. So it's good that you brought that up. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, maybe. So let me switch gears and just throw something kind of crazy out there. This is kind of silly, but I don't know, maybe it's not. I was really interested in just the efficacy of certain kinds of cash transfer and investment programs. In particular, some of these programs offering like kind of a basket of benefits in low income, including direct cash, some like debt relief, retraining, a number of things, would end up yielding over the lifetime of the person some very large multiple on the initial investment. And so like my like dumb question is there some way that you could like use that multiple to fuel the system? Where like, what if you make that multiple 10% smaller, but then you like can use that 10% to fuel, doing this with more people? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And like today you have like Lambda School.
It's ISA like, isn't it?
Yeah, it provides you with an education and you pay them back later with an income share agreement. So only if your income increases do you need to pay back. I actually bought 3 lunches from Austin for $1 million so that they would have some money to experiment with money on top of that, so that they pay you a stipend so that you have the time of work to actually go through the education, because like that's probably the cost of the education is one, but the time is two. And I think they were able to make it work, but not as well as, I can speculate on it, but it's kind of the next step, right? That the next step is not just paying for the education upfront, also kind of paying people to do the education. And you can draw that out to paying people for achieving learning goals and things like that. Because today it's like, well, you better study because it's going to be good for you later in life, but you're like young and have a very limited outlook. And so the people without strong parenting are kind of left out. So what if you just if I would have gotten paid during university for getting better grades, I would have certainly gotten better grades than I did.
Great.
Yeah, Andy, can you explain the multiplier thing again? I was a little lost there.
Yeah, sorry. This is, again, kind of a very naive idea, but roughly along the same lines as Lambda School. But the finding is that like, if you relieve people of some debt, give them a direct cash transfer, give them some like basic preventative care, and give them some like basic skill training, and say that costs you $500 to do all those things, then like the impact on their lifetime income is some like large multiple of that. And so like, what if you were to take 10% of like that impact of the income and then like use that to fund doing that to more people?
I see. Okay. And like thinking how that could be incorporated into like a global income type of mechanism.
Yeah. So it's like, if it's the case that lifting people out of poverty like has this non-linear response, then maybe you can like recapture some of the non-linearity.
The only top of mind thing is if somebody has this multiplying effect because they have GIC, basically that person's empowered to, I guess, maintain that ecosystem if their wealth is being created from this mechanism. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, I don't know if I can't think of anything direct, like measure what their income is over time and then refund the treasury or something.
No, it could be something like take it up the transaction fees or something like this. I don't know.
Gotcha.
I'm going to talk about transaction fees in the remaining 2 minutes. I'm worried about this. So I spent some time studying ZK rollup mechanisms and optimistic rollup mechanisms. This looks like a problem, potentially even with sharding plans. I'm pretty worried because so you need 12,000 transactions a second just for disbursement. But like, if this is the active currency, then presumably there's also exchanges throughout the day. And those exchanges need to be occurring like within the rollups as well, because withdrawals into and out of the rollup contracts are very costly. These contracts can't seem to support this.
Global income coin might break the blockchain, but if you look at, so it's certainly within the top 10 risks, but I don't think it's in the top 3 risks.
No, I don't think so either, but it's worrying. It doesn't seem like it should work, even with the very optimistic 100,000 transactions per second scaling goal of sharding. I'm curious how you think about that.
I believe that that there's I think the people, for example, working on Ethereum are so good that they'll scale out ahead of it, especially if they have to. Like, I think a lot of the current progress is like they're being very cautious not to break anything, but if they have to scale fast, they can do it.
Yeah, and there's other, bridging between blockchains is in the future as well. Like there is mechanisms to where, we're not stuck to one specific implementation of this token. So
I think I have much higher trust in that the blockchain, the people maintaining the blockchain
Okay, right.
will make it work than that Jeff
That
and
seems
me
right.
make it work. I think we.
Well, thanks for the conversation, everyone. I know we're at time, but I appreciate all the answers to my questions.
Thanks, Andy. This is super fun. Jeff, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks for the time. It's super helpful thinking through like how we should communicate things in the white paper. So I really appreciate it.
Right on. Good luck, y'all. This is an exciting project.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.